All right, Agatha All Along is quickly coming to an end. Actually, next week will be the last week we cover Agatha All Along because they're releasing the final two episodes, episode 8 and episode 9, next week. And this is the penultimate week of Agatha All Along. So, guys, let's talk about episode 7, Agatha All Along. This is going to be a full spoiler discussion for Agatha All Along, episode 7. If you have not seen the episode, just save this segment, save this podcast for later, and be sure to come back to it once you have seen the episode because we will be spoiling a lot of things. Guys, I posted, now that that's out of the way, I posted on my community tab. If you haven't been keeping up, make sure to check it out there. But I posted on my community tab as soon as I finished the episode. And I think this really sums up how I felt about this episode. I said, to paraphrase, as somebody who's been lukewarm at best about Agatha All Along, you guys will have seen this throughout my spoiler discussions for all 6 previous episodes of Agatha All Along. I said, as someone who's been lukewarm at best about Agatha All Along, episode 7 was awesome. And it took me a little bit because I think as the episode was going along, I kind of had this thing of, are they going to stick this landing? Because it's a pretty, I'm not going to lie, it's a pretty high concept episode. I mean, it's not, it's not Tenet or whatever, Interstellar or anything like that, but it is dealing with concepts, non-linearity or whatever, non-linear storytelling, I guess I should say. And it did it in a way that, again, with a show like Agatha All Along, that in the past had an episode where they basically just had a rock band singing. And that really wasn't my cup of tea, personally. Again, if you liked it, awesome. That's amazing. I just, personally, not really for me. I think Agatha All Along, to kind of go off on a small digression here, it's not like other shows in the MCU, like Secret Invasion or She-Hulk or whatever, where I go, and I see a lot of things here that I think a lot of people are going to dislike. Agatha All Along is a show that I've seen actually a lot of people really like, and it's a show that for the most part I just gone, not really for me, because I think there are just points that it just doesn't take itself seriously enough that I personally can get invested. I have a threshold of things, and if it goes a little bit too silly, then I get, I stopped getting invested, I guess, as quickly as I would for other things. But all that aside, as we were going along through this episode, I was like, okay, I see the concept here. This is an episode about Lilia, and it's not being told in a linear fashion, but can this episode pull off the ending that I think it's trying to pull off? And I was worried, about halfway through, it was like, this feels like it's a little bit in over its head. You know what I mean? I think it just felt like, hey, they're just trying something for the sake of trying something, and I don't think they're going to stick the landing. And well, no pun intended, because now that I'm thinking about it, stick the landing is a very cruel way to put the ending of this episode. But I do genuinely think that Agatha All Along episode 7 stuck the landing. So let's talk about this. I took notes as always, and we're going to go through this and then go through my thoughts, kind of live as I was watching the episode, and talk about, what I was thinking at different points and what I liked, what I didn't like, and we'll go through it here. So we start out here. The episode is called Death's Hand in Mine, and obviously we knew this was going to be about Rio, and I actually thought this was going to be a bigger episode about Rio and Agatha's romance, because that seems to be the implication in the title, but it turns out that it's not really. I'm sure we'll get more about this in probably episode 8 and episode 9, but yeah, we kind of figured, okay, so this is confirmation. It got spoiled in a Funko Pop, and that's kind of disappointing because I don't know. I don't know if I would have guessed that if I hadn't known. I'm sure New Rockstars and Screen Crush and whatever would have guessed it anyways, even if the Funko Pop hadn't come out. But that was really where I got spoiled, was seeing the Funko Pop of Death as Rio. And I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And obviously, ever since Thanos appeared on the screen, we, based on the comic book, not origin, but, comic book story of Infinity War, where Thanos kills the entire universe because he wants to please Mistress Death, we all kind of thought, okay, well, that's not where they were going with Infinity War, but is that somewhere that the MCU would go eventually? And didn't for a while, but now we finally are getting it in 2024. We're getting Death as incarnate in in a female form. Who knows what form Rio Vidal will show up in next, because, oh boy, she shows up in a terrifying form later on in the episode. But anyways, we will get to that later. So we start out the episode, and we just see Lilia falling. And it's like, okay, what in the world is happening here? She's just kind of falling, and then we quickly cut to Billy and Agatha, and it's like, okay, guess that was just some random thing there. But obviously that pays off in a big way later on in this episode. So we get back to Billy, who, we know it's Billy now, although he does ask during the tarot card reading, am I William or am I Billy? So it's kind of interesting. I wonder if there's sort of a dueling personalities kind of thing going on here, or what's going on. I'm not entirely sure. But anyways, speaking of, just being completely obvious, the question that he asks Agatha is is Wanda Maximoff really dead? Also, what's interesting is that earlier, speaking of that Billy William thing, he says basically that Wanda is not his mother. And he says, I have a mother. So is he referring to Rebecca Kaplan, the Kaplan mother, or is he talking about something else? Probably referring to Mrs. Kaplan. But still, it's just interesting that there's a kind of duality that's going on here that is not really explored that much, but still something to keep an eye on as we move forward towards the end of the series. But yeah, literally, he asks her, is Wanda Maximoff really dead? The question that all of us have been asking for a long time. And I personally am of the belief that, yes, she is dead, but also, could I see the MCU bringing her back? Also, probably, yeah. And Agatha, sure enough, basically speaks to that. She says yes. And I was like, okay, so that's confirmation. And then she pauses and she goes, no, maybe. So yeah, I would think that if they're gonna bring it up in the show like this, because you'd have to think that if they didn't want us to believe that Scarlet Witch was coming back, then they wouldn't talk about it at all. But the fact that they're literally asking the characters the same questions that we're asking ourselves, that seems to indicate that, yeah, it looks like there's a pretty decent chance that Scarlet Witch comes back. We'll see. We'll have to see. I'm still a little less than 50% that she is coming back. I just still have a hard time believing that Elizabeth Olsen would want to come out of quote-unquote MCU retirement for this, but we'll see. And also just, bringing back Scarlet Witch in a TV show, and then obviously you're going to have her appear in a movie later, and everyone's going to be like, wait, I thought she died in not Captain America, what am I saying? Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. So yeah, I don't know. We'll have to see. I'd still put it at like 40% that she shows up at the end, but we'll have to see. But yeah, I think that this version of Billy that we see on the road here, he's pretty angry at Agatha. He's mad, and I kind of like this because it's better to me than the kind of bumbling fanboy that he was throughout most of the series, and he kind of reverts to this later on in the episode during the trial, which not my favorite thing. But I like that he has this sort of seething anger under him because it gives the character, I think, a little bit more groundedness, a little bit more dimensionality here, and I like that very much. Then we enter this trial, which again I've given this spiel before. I'm not a huge fan of this formula, this format of the different trials or whatever. But I think this one was executed so well, much like episode 3. I think was executed pretty well. I think episode 4 and 5, not my favorite. Episode 6 was different, obviously. So yeah, I think that just depending on how they execute it can kind of come off differently. And I think this one was executed very well. They're dressing up here. It's Maleficent. It's the Wicked Witch, and we're doing tarot readings, which I think is kind of interesting. I don't know too much about tarot readings, and again, it's another example of the trial. You're running out of time and whatnot, and it's just still at this point in the episode, because it's so Billy and Agatha dependent, and it's so trial focused, that I was like, I'm still not a huge fan here of the episode. But anyways, there is that. So then we cut back to Lilia, and I actually wrote in my notes, I'm very proud of myself for this, because this was well before we got any sense of the time slipping, or not time slipping, that's Loki, but whatever, slipping out of time. And I wrote in my notes, I said, I feel like there's a little bit of twist coming here with Lilia, and we'll see what that's about. And sure enough, right after that, it's revealed that she is basically slipping in and out of time and going into her not different bodies, but almost her different minds, throughout the past, the show, and also even in the 1600s as well, which is amazing. And it's such an interesting angle to take with this character, and it's been building throughout the show for sure, but it's been such a minor part of the show thus far that I feel like it's been, really exploring it here is such a good thing. And yeah, I really like that. So then I was, the part of the show that I referenced earlier, the part of the episode where I was like, I don't quite know if they're going to stick this landing, is when all of a sudden Lilia and Jennifer Kale end up in the trials all of a sudden, and later on we get the gaps filled in for us that okay, there's a reason that they ended up back here through the shelf and whatnot. But right in this moment, I kind of was like, is this something they're just not going to explain, and they end up here because time and magic and whatnot, and just go with it. I kind of thought that's where they were going to go, because honestly guys, this show has not proven to me that they're really capable of that kind of high level storytelling. Turns out they proved me wrong, and I'm very glad that they did, because this episode again is great. It's awesome. So yeah, I think that again, it's trippy, it's weird. I haven't seen Black Mirror personally, but it's what I imagine people saying Black Mirror is like. Obviously probably not nearly as crazy as Black Mirror, but still just something really different, and something that is really it captures you, it captivates your attention. It has me very invested, and it's just doing something completely different, and I respect that. So then we go through and we cut back through all these different moments. She's having flashbacks, and honestly, I didn't write a whole lot here because I don't think that there's just a whole lot to talk about here, because it's just sort of peeling back the layers of the onion in a very nonlinear way, which I think is really great. And it's just, even though the execution is not perfect, I think that the concepts that they were going for here and the ways in which they were trying to articulate them are so interesting and well done that by the time we get to the end of the episode and we finally understand how Lilia is reading the tarot cards, and she's seeing the future too, by the way. She said she sees Jennifer Kale as the path forward, and she says, I think, to Jen, that, hey, if you see, what is it, if you hear Rio call you a coward, you duck. Like, so I'm sure that'll be something that comes up later on in the series as well. I'm sure that'll be a callback. But yeah, I mean, again, it's just it's so cool how they were able to piece together the layers and peel back the onion, and I think that's great. And then also one of the final scenes that you see her in the past is that she sees Rio as Death, and oh my gosh, she looks horrifying. She looks terrified. I thought it was just going to be Rio and maybe some darker makeup or whatever, I don't know, but no, she, like, some goth makeup, I mean, but no, she looks like actually terrifying, horrifying. And I kind of hope that's not what she looks like the rest of the series. Not because it looks bad, but because it legitimately kind of creeped me out there. So yeah, it looks like we get our confirmation that Rio is Death here. And yeah, this episode kind of keeps going, and they go through the trial. Again, not really much to talk about here because I was just on board. And I also did not see the fact that the Salem 7 just all get impaled. And the fact that even Lilia gets impaled at the end, and it's just something about this episode. Maybe it's the concept, maybe it's the fact that they really went for it, because it is still a similar format, I guess, of the trial and trying to get through it, but it just does something so different and so unique. And honestly, this is something where the MCU has not delved into before, and the writing was pretty sharp. And again, even like a show like Miss Marvel that tried to do a little bit of time, the grandfather paradox or whatever, just like, you're fulfilling your own time loop or whatever, it just didn't really land. And the way that this episode was able to land, I thought was really great. And also, just what a nice little touch to have time in a bottle at the end of the episode here. I don't know if it's a coincidence. You had Evan Peters in the last episode, and obviously Time in a Bottle is the quintessential song associated with that Quicksilver scene in Days of Future Past. But again, I mean, I'm not here to declare victory and say, oh, okay, Agatha All Along is suddenly the best show on television and, all that kind of stuff. I, don't think that's true. But I also think that it's encouraging to know that the writers were able to kind of pull something off like this that was able to tie together a lot of past elements into something that is so cohesive and makes a lot of sense in this episode. And I'm hoping that while I didn't love a lot of this series thus far, that they're able to tie together a lot of what they've been setting up at the end of this series really well. Because I think that that's what encouraged me the most about this episode, is that it took a lot of the concepts that have been laid and planted throughout the past of this show and tied it together in a way that was so interesting and captivating. And I love that about this episode. So guys, this is a return to form for Agatha All Along. I think this is probably my favorite episode. It was awesome, and I can't wait to hear what you guys have to say about it in the comments down below. Let me know what you guys think about episode 7 of Agatha All Along. Would love to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments down below.